Yo, what's going on everyone? ForgetYou99 here is Wednesday again, and that means it's another Lightfall update, this time weapon tuning preview. Fantastic, let's just jump right into it. Weapon archetypes. Red reticle is now going to be enabled on PC. If you didn't know, for console players, whenever they would hover over an enemy with their reticle, it would turn red when the target is at the effective range. PC players didn't have this because I think it just had to do with PC having a lot better time with handling range and stability, but it's a great change as actually knowing when your damage is going to start falling off is so nice to have. Then the linear fusion rifles nerf, we all saw it coming. Of course, they even say this themselves. They have been in the top dog spot for a long while now. So, reduced damage versus champions, mini-bosses, bosses, and vehicles by 15%. That is a massive blow to their damage. But Sleeper Simulant and Queenbreaker are unaffected. This means Sleeper Simulant might actually have higher damage than pretty much every other linear fusion rifle. And that would be good, seeing as it's an exotic and it kind of deserves that. So that's a great change. You know, personally, some people might be a little annoyed by them nerfing it, but I think it's needed just for balance. Moving on to the machine guns. Now, machine guns haven't been in the best place for the past while. Of course, they've been good on ad clear, but at this point in the game, anything can ad clear to insane degrees. So, machine guns definitely need a little help. They're getting an increased damage by 10%. Now, this will change some of the time to kills in Crucible, but if you're not in Crucible, don't worry, you're just getting the increased damage by 10%, and it looks like this is going to be applying to all exotics as well. So, all machine guns in the game, as well as the increased reserve ammo by 50% at 0 inventory stat and 20% at 100 inventory stat. What this means is that there's actually a hidden ammo counter on every weapon that gets decided by percentages and stuff. So on some linear fusion rifles, you might take enhanced battery, which is supposed to give it a +1 into its magazine, but on some linear fusions, because of its inventory stat, it doesn't actually give you the 6th round and instead just keeps you at 5, because the number isn't high enough to actually round up. So it's very interesting, they're actually explaining it a little bit here. I hope we actually do get more explanation on how it actually works, as it's one of those behind the screen things that exists and people should know about. Moving on, heavy grenade launchers. Now, they haven't been, as they say, touched in a while. They've been in a very unique spot. If you remember, they used to be a top DPS weapon with Prospector doing insane amounts of damage. But since then, they've been kind of meh. So they're increasing damage versus champions, mini-bosses, bosses, and vehicles. So all yellow bars by 20% and miners by 40%. That's massive. That's absolutely massive. And it doesn't exclude any exotics, which means Parasite is going to destroy the game. Improved projectile collision, making it slightly easier to land hits, increased blast radius by 1 meter, and Parasite is unaffected. It does huge damage already. Oh my god, I can't even read. There we go. Poor Parasite. But there are some fantastic other grenade launchers. I also wonder how the increased blast radius, all that might work with a grenade launcher like Colony, where it doesn't have a huge blast radius to begin with. Moving on, shotguns. We got the shotgun update, so the reticle actually showed the spread pattern and the correct spread pattern, but now the reticle for the actual shotgun, the circle, will change in size proportional to the spread angle, because a lot of these weren't actually changing in the most accurate ways with people's different FOV options, so now it should be a lot more accurate to what your spread is on a shotgun. And then kinetic weapons. Kinetic slot weapons have always done 5% more damage versus unshielded targets in PvE. This meant that kinetic slot stasis weapons were straight up better with extra functionality and no downside. So what they want to do is they actually want to give players more reason to run kinetic damage type weapons. So they're increasing the damage multiplier on all kinetic primary weapons from 1.05 to 1.1, and they're separating special weapons to have 1.15 multiplier. Now this is very interesting, as this is kind of one of the first separations for kinetic. And they even say that there's also a kinetic damage type perk coming in Lightfall, as well as stasis weapons no longer have a 5% damage bonus versus unshielded targets in PvE. Now, it's interesting they point this out, as in Witch Queen, we saw the first enemy with the stasis shield, and then we never saw it again. And it was kind of frustrating, but this might make sense now, because stasis is actually going to have its own shield associated with it. So it no longer needs to do that 5% bonus damage to unshielded targets, which I think is a fantastic change, makes kinetics more viable again, and actually separates them, as stasis weapons were starting to take over the kinetic slot and your primary weapon slot. So fantastic change. And then exotics, we got a whole slew of exotic changes. Pretty much they're adding on a bunch of verbs from subclasses 3.0. So Queenbreaker's blinding effect will now actually be the Arc 3.0 blind, as well as Ruinous Effigy, the transmutation sphere. When you do the dunk, it will now suppress enemies. Leviathan's Breath will actually apply volatile on perfect draw. Insane change. As well as increasing damage from 396 to 442, allowing it to one-hit kill all supers in PvE again, and increase damage versus champions by 30%. Everyone, Leviathan's Breath might become insanely good next season, so keep your eyes peeled, because that volatile change, any way that you can trigger volatile without actually having to do the whole grenade setup, mwah, beautiful. Moving on to 1000 Voices. Now, we haven't seen it used in the DPS slot for a while now, and it's kind of disappointing, seeing as it's a raid exotic and it takes a long time to get for some people. So what they're doing is now each explosion will apply 10 Scorch Stacks, and then when you have Ember of Ashes equipped, it'll apply an extra +5 to a total of 15 Scorch Stacks on each explosion. Now, if you have Ember of Ashes equipped, landing a full burst on a single target will trigger an ignition, which is very interesting, especially if you build into an ignition build, as well as ignitions depend upon the weapon's base damage. So 1000 Voices could actually have the highest ignition damage in the game. And then moving on, Sunshot will now actually apply Scorch Stacks on explosion kills, thank goodness. And then Polaris Lance will finally, its burn is being changed over to Scorch. It might actually come back as a viable weapon. Perfect Fifth shots now apply 40 plus 20 Scorch Stacks instead of a custom burn. Now, if you're seeing the +20, that is with Ember of Ashes. And then Two-Tailed Fox, it is now getting Scorch Stacks applied to its Solar Rocket, and then the Void Rocket already suppresses. The Solar Rocket does 60 Scorch Stacks and then +30 with Ember of Ashes, which means you would actually need to fire 2 rockets off to trigger an ignition with it. As well as, I think this is the biggest change, Prometheus Lens is getting incandescent for its perk on its catalyst. Insanity. Prometheus Lens is already super fun to use, especially for any Scorch builds and ability builds for Solar. So throwing on Incandescent just makes it even more deadly. Prometheus Lens is going to rise up in one of my favorite weapons, I bet. It's going to be fun. And then finally, Grand Overture. It's actually going to have Arc Blind instead of just the blind that it used to have. So now it actually synergizes with Arc 3.0. Thank goodness. Woohoo, we love those changes. They are Moving on, they're adding more hipfire reticles, so things like the glaive, where you can see how full your shield is. They're going to be adding more of those, so the Manticore, you can actually see the stacks of anti-grav repulsor you have now while you were in hipfire mode. For some perks, Osmosis will now actually work with Strand. It's good that they actually changed this before instead of after and forgetting about it. So, fantastic. Any weapons that you have Osmosis on, you can now use them for Strand weapons come Lightfall, which will be very nice, as the Strand weapons when Lightfall drops will most likely be quite limited. They are definitely going to be increasing how fast we are getting the Strand weapons, as that was a big complaint when Beyond Light dropped, and how slow it took to actually get some stasis weapons. So expect Strand weapons actually to roll out a lot quicker. Another change is Elemental Capacitor. Its effect will be 20 bonus airborne effectiveness, and 25 with the enhanced perk when you have Strand equipped. So this is another, hint, of course, that Strand is very mobile, very in the air, and a lot of the airborne effectiveness changes were in preparation for Strand to come out. They also reworked Rewind rounds, which only used to be on Vault of Glass weapons, to be on more general weapons, so this would be very interesting. Rewind rounds is a fantastic perk, at least for some people, and it's cool that we're actually getting it on other weapons outside of the raid. It will be another kind of topic for discussion if raid weapons should have their perks scattered around. I think at this point in the game, it's okay, but I don't know if specialty perks for raids should just be everywhere, and I feel like they should be a little more allocated to the raid weapons, but we'll see if that actually matters in any of the changes moving forward after Lightfall. As well as they are kind of doing another complete rework on Eager Edge, so no longer deactivates when moving faster than 35 meters per second. Deactivates correctly after a single melee swing, so you can't get 2 off. Reduce the base lunge distance from 2 to 1.8. Reduced airborne lunge distance penalty from 25% to 20%. And the enhanced perk now increases lunge distance slightly back up to 2. So this change is to basically, as you can see, it's not a total rework, it's just more trying to get Eager Edge to not be as broken as it used to be, and not be as bad as it kind of is right now. So, great change. We'll actually see how it plays out when Lightfall drops. And then blinding grenades on grenade launchers don't do arc damage, so they figured it was appropriate to rename them to have less overlap in names. I agree, as it can be very confusing, especially if you're a new player. So blinding grenades on all grenade launchers will now be disorienting grenades, but they will still do the same thing. And then Viced Stinger. It has been a fantastic perk that is so strong, especially on a weapon like Fire and Forget. Go get it now, it's amazing. But what they're doing is, instead of a full reload on perk activation, it now reloads 25% of the magazine. Of course, this will work a little bit differently on how percentages apply to individual weapons. But this is quite the change. Of course, this is coming in Lightfall, so right now, used Viced Stinger to your heart's content. Use the perk, or use the mod from the artifact Sharpshooting to even get a higher chance of activating Viced Stinger. Use it as much as you can now. I think it'll still be a top Origin perk when Lightfall drops, because 25% of the magazine is still quite a bit. So we'll see how it works out, but personally, I think these are some fantastic changes. Of course, Lightfall is a big drop, and I'm sure, every week we're getting more and more updates. So Personally, I think these changes are good. Another rebalance. Hopefully we see a bit of a different meta from the linear fusions, maybe a return back to grenade launchers. But at least from now, it seems like they're doing a very good job at balancing things out and making multiple things viable. Grenade launchers or rocket launchers are still viable. Linear fusions will most likely still be very viable. And then grenade launchers making a comeback with machine guns? That'd be fantastic. Now, they do say at the end here a couple little things. Is some of the changes they can't really go over now is the full auto melee accessibility option. Now, this will apply to all forms of melee. It's interesting to see how it'll actually apply, if you'll still have that kind of slow stun, like that hit stun effect that you have after you do a melee attack, or if it'll be just like rapid fire punches. I think the full auto melee will also really help out glaives, as having to spam the light attack to do your combo can be very repetitive. As well as adding more hipfire reticles to exotic weapons so you can actually see more readily available when the special thing to activate is up. So weapons like Symmetry, maybe even Parasite. Of course, they're doing the change with the Manticore, but it'll be great to actually see more of these, as they're a welcome addition, especially when glaives first dropped and seeing them. So that'll be very nice. And like, of course they say, adding features like charge meters and exotic perk counters, as well as balance changes are in the works, but a little too early to get into them, which completely understandable. I expect a lot of the balance changes to shake things up heavily, and they don't want to lay out all their cards immediately. So, fantastic Lightfall news update. This has been very fun every week to be going through with you guys. I think the changes so far have been overwhelmingly positive, and I'm definitely looking forward to next week's update, as well as the TWAB tomorrow, as they always love dropping more news. So, you know, Lightfall is coming closer and closer, so let's get ready, let's catch up on all this news, make sure we know exactly what's going to happen when Lightfall drops, and enjoy it to the best of our ability. Thank you so much for watching. This has been FreakyDude99. Hope you have a fantastic day. Peace out.